Hello, welcome to Native Yoga Center. My name is Todd McLaughlin. Today, spondylolisthesis in yoga, do's and don'ts. So I want to show you a couple of tips and tricks that are important to integrate into your yoga practice. Perhaps you already have a long-term established yoga practice and you have just received the diagnosis of a spondylolisthesis, or perhaps you have spondylolisthesis and you're searching for ways to do yoga to help alleviate some of the pain that can be associated. So I'm going to show you some tips and tricks that I've learned in my own journey, as I have 30 years of yoga practice experience teaching, about 20 years, a little over 20 years now, and also have spondylolisthesis. What is spondylolisthesis? For those of you that are not sure what that is, it's when a vertebra slides forward or to out of position and puts excessive pressure on the spinal cord. Also, if you have a structure that is typically aligned well, like the spine, and one of the links in the chain move out of position, it creates instability. So rule number one, the do, strengthen your core. And so for me to demonstrate a way to work with strong core, pelvic tilts from the supine position. So if you're lying on your back, and what we want to start to learn and understand is neutral spine versus lumbar curve versus flexion in the spine. So if you lay on your back and you bend your knees, be aware that you have sacrum. This is the downward facing triangular bone that is in between your two sides of your pelvis and your very low back. And then we have the lumbar spine. Now, typically the lumbar has a curve. If you have a spondylolisthesis where the vertebra in the lumbar has shifted forward, excuse me, a deep bend in the lumbar, like I'm doing here now, where I have my rib cage up and I could slide a hand underneath my back, we have to be careful of pushing too far into that motion. So what I'm going to do is squeeze my belly and just do this real simple motion of holding the contraction of the abdominal wall. I'm going to have you just try to flatten your low back down onto the floor, and you achieve that by pressing your feet downward toward the ground. It's right before the moment where your hips would lift off or lift up. So you keep your hips on the ground and just feel the ability to do this very simple pelvic tilt. And this is kind of 101 for starting to recognize how the spinal column can bend and how the relationship to the spine and the pelvis and the hips connects, and ways to control this movement. This is really important. So strengthening the core can involve tightening up the abdominal muscles, getting the back relatively flat on the floor, squeezing your quad, and just, it doesn't even have to be a high lift, but just pushing down and really focusing on tightening this area of the body. So then what is a don't? A don't is, I recommend avoid back bending poses such as going deeply into upward dog, going deeply into camel pose. Two ways to approach. What we want to do now, the next do, is learn how to hold a neutral spine. A neutral spine implies that here I'm doing extension and here I'm doing really strong flexion. I'm going to try to keep my spine relatively neutral and hinge or move at the pelvis. If we go into a back bend, I'm going to emphasize tucking the tailbone down and through to keep this relatively stable. And I can still work a little bit of leg strength like camel, but you're really focusing on holding the strength at the center. So that's a definite do. What we want to be aware of is we also want to try to stay away from doing any big jumping movements. Like sometimes in Ashtanga, we do these sort of jumps where you are doing large jumps, and or we have motions where we might end up jumping and making really strong kind of impactful landing positions. Try to avoid that. Do things like walk forward with your feet and just kind of eliminate some of the jumping motion. Watch how even in a sun salutation, I'm going to approach bringing my hands to the floor from a neutral spine perspective. Inhale, even to the point that when I raise my arms up, I'm going to avoid doing a big arching back bend to lift the arms above. I'm going to try to stabilize the core so that when the arms are going up, I'm not bending back like this and opening chest. You got to keep your ribs in, and you try to keep the stomach flat so that when you raise your arms up and come down. Now, also when I fold, I'm not going to fold with my spine rounding really deeply forward. I'm going to hinge at my knees and hips, push the hips back and come down, where you keep the back relatively neutral as you make the movement. And this is really important for spondylolisthesis because we can still make these movements. We just don't want to work in a way where we're not paying attention and we put excessive pressure where there's already a little bit of instability. So what we need to focus on is less flexibility and more strength. So this is absolutely critical. All right. And another way that we can work with neutral spine. So we have cow and cat. Now on a good day, working a little up and down in the cow and cat can be great for back pain. But if we have spondylolisthesis, watch how slow, how minimal the movement of the extension and flexion is here right now. I'm going into extension, I'm going into flexion. It's a very tiny amount of movement. The whole time, though, I'm really focused on pulling the belly in while I'm making the movement. So we're going to minimize the amount of bending that happens in the spinal column. We're going to focus more on having the movement happen in the low back. So this is one of the key things that we're going to try to apply throughout a lot of the different poses. Now, another place that we need to exercise awareness is when we go into twisting poses. For example, Ardha Matsyendrasana. This is where we cross one leg over and we go to twist. Now, one way that I can work very moderate twisting is instead of collapsing into the rounding of the spine and then pulling the body into a rotational motion, I'm going to attempt to manipulate the movement at the pelvis. So in other words, instead of rounding back, I'm going to actually come up. So we want to think a lot about lifting and engaging the belly, and then we can still twist. Because my spondylolisthesis is down low, you might be experiencing a different section of the spine. So you just have to apply the same principle based upon where you feel it. But we can still make rotational movement through the vertebra up in the neck. And the thoracic doesn't move as much, but we're going to isolate the movement or neutralize the movement in the lumbar if this is where you're feeling the spondylolisthesis. Now, all of these rules can apply with good old-fashioned back pain. A herniation in the disc is different from spondylolisthesis, but nonetheless, if I have a herniation in my spine, I want to avoid compressing down onto that herniation. And instead, we're going to engage core strength, or in other words, squeeze the belly, in this case, to try to lift up and then do very moderate rotational motion. One tidbit of advice that I received that I thought was really beneficial, and since I've started implementing it, I found it to help quite a bit. Imagine that you've had spinal fusion. A metal rod has been placed on both sides of your spine, and it's locked you down, so you are unable to move. What we need to almost do if you have not gone for that type of surgery and you're learning how to manage the pain and still have a yoga practice, we need to imagine that an iron bar has been fused to our vertebra and move like we had lumbar surgery. And so I know this can be really challenging. It is also extremely rewarding because you start feeling a little better because we move in a way that we take care of it. So stick with me here. Always listen to your physician, consult with your doctor, and always listen and follow in a way that you feel is true to your heart. But I just want to give you some tips for those of you that are working with this. And you may have already had a spinal fusion and still having some pain. And we still want to practice yoga because there's so many other benefits that can happen for the entire holistic aspect. So all these rules can apply as well, in my opinion. All right, so let's see, what else could we investigate? One more I want to point out is that the legs together in front, if I'm going for a forward bend, similar fashion, I might just hold my shins and I'm going to practice forward bending by moving just at the pelvis. I'm going to avoid doing really strong forward flexion motion with the spine. I'm going to focus more on uplift, belly in, and doing very simple forward bending, holding more like here. The other key is that if you are feeling pain, don't go with the classic adage of push through the pain. In this situation, it doesn't work like that. I thought that, I kept pushing, I kept getting in more pain. Once I got an MRI, I realized I had spondylolisthesis and started to work with it. Now I'm in less pain because I know don't just push through it. But I had to learn it the hard way. That's why I'm here to try to help you. I want to try to encourage you and all of us together that are dealing and working with this, that um, try to not just push through the pain anymore. It's hard for us type A personalities. We can do it though. So hold strong. All right. So that's the basic gist. I feel like these are the real simple aspects that will take plenty of work to implement into your yoga practice. And I hope this helps. If you have any questions, I love answering. Thank you so much for everyone who's commented that has found my series of videos on YouTube related to this specific topic. Thank you so much for commenting. I really, really appreciate it because it helps me to realize that I'm not the only one, and I've learned so much by hearing your thoughts and comments. So definitely reach out to me. I'd love to hear what's going on for you. I hope you have a wonderful day. Namaste.